Welcome back to another video. We're going to be going over Gloom and especially the fear mode that you have to face while in Gloom. Now, for those of you who do Gloom, you guys will know that fear mode is literally the hardest part about doing Gloom. Everything else is, I would say, rather easy compared to fear mode, because while in fear mode, you're not able to see anything, so you're basically left to guess where your position is, how the meteors are falling, and you have to deal with mobs that he summons, and also there are a bunch of other factors that cause you to have abnormal statuses, such as petrification, reverse, skill lock, and a whole bunch of other things. So it's really annoying to deal with, and I figure I make a little guide going over some tips I have for surviving Gloom's fear mode. So the first general tip that applies not only to when you're in fear mode, but also when you're outside of fear mode, is you want to avoid stun meteors at all costs. Now, stun meteors are these meteors right here, these dark purple orbs that fall from the sky. And why I say you have to avoid these at all costs and not the other two types of meteors is that once you get stunned in Gloom and you're not able to move, a lot of bad things can happen to you, and that a lot of bad things get multiplied by a factor of 20 once you're in fear mode. So you want to make sure that you're avoiding stun meteor at all times, and obviously sometimes you just can't dodge everything. Either you're stuck in that attack animation or whatever, but you want to try to put your focus on that to make sure that you're avoiding the stun meteors, because they will cost you a bunch of lives if you're not doing it properly. The second tip that I have for you is that you want to time your fear mode so that happens during the check. The check is basically the leg platforms that Gloom summons, and when he summons these tentacle platforms, you want to time it so that your fear mode happens during them. And when I say time it, I mean, get hit by meteors that are not stun meteors, so you're taking damage and essentially increasing your fear gauge. Now, for those of you who may or may not know, if you take damage, your fear gauge goes up more than it normally does. There's a standard rate that it has, and essentially the longer that you're inside Gloom, the more the gauge goes up. So you want to make sure you time your fear mode so that happens during check. And why I say that is you have more space to move around when you are on the platforms, whereas if these platforms didn't exist, you have less space to move around and you're not able to dodge as efficiently and effectively as if you were to have more space to move around. Now, when you're in fear mode and you're taking damage, it's important to note that the more damage you take, either from mobs hitting you, meteors hitting you, getting hit by whatever else, if you're taking damage, the fear mode gauge will go down in a slower manner than if you were to not take any damage at all. So ideally, you want to avoid as much as you can and dodge as much as you can and kill the mobs that are coming at you. Because if you don't and you take damage from them, then it just prolongs your fear mode, and that could be very bad, especially when the lasers happen, because then you have to deal with the lasers, which is still livable, but it just increases your chance of death. To make fear mode shorter and go down faster, you can kill the mobs that Gloom spawns, and these are the mobs that follow you around. They either spawn on the far left side or the far right side, and I think specifically the top left and top right, it's random, and I'm not exactly sure how the spawn is actually targeted, if it's twice to the left before it goes to the right or whatever. But the idea is you want to be killing these mobs, and when you're in Gloom, if you're doing this boss, you shouldn't really have an issue being able to one-shot these mobs before they start hitting you. Now, the mobs that he summons that follows you around, keep in mind that they don't really do much to you, except for the fact that they reverse your keys. So how they reverse your keys is that they collapse together. Once they separate and collapse together and you're in the middle of it, then you get key reversed and you take I think a good amount of HP damage. I think it's 20 or 30% of HP damage. So you want to make sure you're not getting your keys reversed, because that will screw your dodging up very badly. And another thing to note is that why I tell you to time your fear mode so that the check platform summon is on the bottom floor. There are these petrification fire looking black hands, and how they trigger is if you stand on them for a microsecond, then right after they'll basically clamp down on you, and once you get clamped down, you'll get petrified, and you have to spam your left and right keys to essentially avoid it and break free, which is absolutely a hassle. But if you're on the platforms, and specifically the taller platforms inside the check phase, then you're able to basically avoid them and not get targeted by them. But if you're not in check phase, you don't really have anything to protect you from these hands, unless you have just an insane amount of vertical mobility, then you can basically dodge it. Otherwise, it's just not going to be a fun thing for you. And keep in mind that these petrification hands at the bottom level do reach you if you stand too close to the bottom, even when you're on the platform. So when you're on the lower side of the two tentacles, the petrification hands can reach you and does have enough range, so just keep that in mind. A thing that I like to do is, even if there are no platforms, what you want to basically do is just stand on the hands for a little bit. When I say a little bit, I mean a brief microsecond, so that the hands clamp down and trigger. And once they trigger, there will be a cooldown before they can trigger again. So that way you're able to move through them freely, but just keep the timing in mind, because it's very important that you time it properly. Otherwise, you'll get screwed pretty hard. And classes with nice vertical mobility, such as Zero, will do pretty well here, because they're able to lift up to dodge the petrification hands. Another tip I can give for when you're in fear mode is that you don't want to jump around like crazy. You want to move around a little bit, but don't go too crazy with it. Because if you go too crazy with it, then you're going to accidentally flash jump or teleport into a meteor, and you won't even see it coming. You won't be able to react in time. Whereas if you move a few steps at a time, one hop at a time, you're able to manage your movements a lot better, and you have way better control over how you do things, and it'll just help you mostly avoid stun meteors. You don't want to stand still, because if you stand still for too long, you'll obviously get killed by the little sniper skill lock thing, which I'll show you if you have not seen it. And essentially, there is a sniper thing that he summons, and what that does, it tracks where you are, and then once it tracks where you are, it'll give a small animation showing that it's about to clamp down, and it basically locks onto where you are at that particular moment. So once the animation spawns, you have about, I would say, 2 seconds to get out of the way and not come back into that area until that animation disappears. Otherwise, when it clamps down during the animation, you'll basically get skill lock, and it'll literally take half of your HP away when it does the skill lock animation. So you're both skill locked and you lose a lot of HP, which can be very bad, because if you get hit by 2 more meteors, you're basically dead. It was actually a lot worse before, because there would be basically no animation delay and activation, so it will literally lock onto you and shoot you right after, so you're skill locked right away. But right now they made a recent change in the bug kakapoo quality of life thing, and so you can actually see it coming way better before it actually clamps down on you. So that's something that Nexon has changed, and I am super happy for. That's it for this video, guys. Hopefully you guys found it helpful and you guys learned something new that you guys didn't know before. Gloom is a very tough boss, and it's very RNG heavy, especially if all the meteors are falling, so it can be quite tricky. It took me quite a bit of time before I actually got this boss down. And for classes with Dark Sight, it's a lot easier because you can avoid the meteors, but the meteors can be such a huge RNG factor that you really don't want to deal with, because they can literally get you killed at an instant's notice, and you could lose a lot of lives back to back if there are a lot of meteors dropping on top of you. And that's all RNG dependent, so you really can't do much about it, but just suck it up and move on, really. If you guys found this video helpful and would like to support the channel, be sure to like the video and subscribe. As always, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.